There are places on Earth where the stone itself seems to breathe, where each block awakens a silent question, and each shadow reveals a piece of something that shouldn't exist. Sacsayhuamán is one of those places, and maybe, if you feel like certain things are no coincidence, this video is just what your soul was ready to hear. Because there are mysteries that were not meant to be explained. They were made to be remembered. Imagine walking through a fortress built almost 3,700 meters above sea level under a sky so clear that it seems to touch the memory of the universe. In front of you, gigantic walls curve like a spiral of force, fitted together with absolute precision, as if an ancient hand knew how to shape rock like clay. There, in the heart of the Andes, each block seems to hold a secret. There is no cement. There are no inscriptions that explain it. Just the silence of something that shouldn't be possible. And as you look at those colossal walls, the question arises, almost by itself. Who could have done this? How were stones weighing more than 100 tons cut, shaped, and fitted together with perfect curves, impossible angles and contours that still baffle engineers today? Science tries to explain, history tries to organize. But the soul recognizes when something is out of the ordinary. Maybe it's because when faced with buildings like this, we feel something that isn't just admiration. It's a memory, as if a forgotten part of us recognizes a lost technology, a knowledge that rests deep within humanity, waiting to be awakened. Some call this ancestral intuition. Others call it spiritual memory. As the wind passes through the stones, it is easy to imagine ancient hands working effortlessly, guided by an understanding different from our own, an understanding made of vibration, rhythm, and tune with the earth. And the more we look, the more we realize that Sacsayhuamán is not just a fortress. It's a psychological portal, a bridge between what we know and what we fear to admit. Perhaps not everything we have been taught about our past is complete. And then the question that opens this journey arises. What if these stones are trying to tell us something? Something about who we were, what we forgot, and what we can still remember. When we arrive in Sacsayhuamán for the first time, something inside us hesitates before we even understand why. There is a deep, almost visceral impression that we are stepping onto a stage where humanity has lived a chapter that is not included in books. The city of Cusco vibrates below, but the top of that hill holds its own silence, as if the stones breathe memories that cannot be erased. No matter how many times experts try to define this place as Inca, ceremonial, or military, intuition always whispers that the story is bigger, much bigger. What we see at first glance are zigzag-shaped megalithic walls, made up of giant blocks that fit together like pieces of an impossible three-dimensional puzzle. Each block has its own design, as if to avoid the monotony of repetition. Some have 12 faces, others 16. Others have curves so delicate that they seem to have been molded by hands that understood stone as living matter. And yet, all these surfaces fit together with such absolute precision that not even a sheet of paper passes between them. This is not just architecture, it's intention. It is materialized consciousness. The official story states that the Incas, without wheels, without iron, without advanced pulleys, cut, transported, and set these rocks into place using stone hammers. Stone hammers. Against blocks of andesite and diorite rock, two of the hardest stones ever worked by humanity. But when we observe calmly, we realize that this explanation does not align with what logic, engineering, and spirituality itself point out. How to transport hundreds of tons up a mountain, how to generate internal cuts with perfect angles, how to create three-dimensional curves, without leaving marks of error, without misaligned lines, without scars from repetitive effort. It is at this point that Sacsayhuamán begins to reveal itself, not as a technical enigma, but as an emotional mirror. The sensation it provokes is not that of a work built by brute force, but that of a creation made with knowledge. Knowledge that dialogued with frequencies, with vibrations, with something that we barely understand today. Perhaps that's why, when walking along its ramps and platforms, we feel an internal call, stay until the end, because the answer may be here, hidden among the shadows of these silent giants. The most fascinating thing is that the stones don't just tell an architectural story, they reveal a pattern of thought. Each block, regardless of size, was shaped to fit the other with absolute perfection, as if both had been carved simultaneously. This requires more than calculation. Requires three-dimensional vision, cyanal intuitive. It requires a direct connection between intention and matter. Maybe that's why so many spiritual traditions in the Andes talk about the heart of the stone, as if the ancients understood that the mineral responds to those who know how to listen to it. And it is precisely here that the mystery deepens. Because if a civilization was able to shape rocks of this size with such skill, what else did it master? Energy, sound, vibration? We don't know. But what we know is that, in front of these walls, the feeling that pages are missing in our history becomes almost inevitable. Sacsayhuamán doesn't just challenge archaeology, it challenges our memory. It challenges our humility. It challenges the belief that we know everything about who we were. And perhaps that's the real revelation. This place wasn't just made to survive time. It was designed to spark questions. Questions that not only fit in the mind, but also in the soul. And then another question arises that leads us to the next step. If these giant blocks were erected with such absolute perfection, what exactly were they trying to communicate? When we approach the colossal blocks of Sacsayhuamán, we notice something that goes beyond reason. The first impact is physical, the size, the weight, the presence. The second is psychological, the feeling that we are facing something that defies not just engineering, but the logic of any known era. Each rock seems to have an individuality, its own design, a mineral identity carved with intention. There is no repetition. There is no easily recognizable cutting pattern. There are no traces of improvisation. There is precision. There is purpose. And there is a strange absence of explanations. The most intriguing thing is that these blocks were not just stacked. They were fitted together as if they were part of a single organism. Those internal curves, those multiple angles, those surfaces that meet so perfectly, suggest something more sophisticated than simple artisans working with rudimentary hammers. The feeling, when we analyze it carefully, is that the stones were not cut. They were shaped, molded like clay, but on a titanic scale. Each face seems to flow toward the next, as if the stone had been malleable, obedient, almost alive. Traditional archaeology explains that the Incas performed repetitive wear on harder stones and adjusted the shape over months of manual friction. However, when we look closely, this hypothesis loses strength, because the internal curves do not show abrasion marks but rather smoothness, because the blocks do not wear linearly, but three-dimensionally, as if they were driven by an unknown tool or a process that our current technology does not easily replicate. It's as if someone has understood the rock's behavior on a molecular or vibrational level. And here comes the paradox that echoes within us. If these stones were shaped with conventional techniques, why haven't we found the tools? Why are there no straight lines indicating cut? Why are there no chips, residues, lithic workshops, remains of experiments or construction errors? Sacsayhuamán seems to have been made all at once, by hands that knew exactly what they were doing, without hesitation, without attempts, without apparent flaws. This absence of errors is perhaps the biggest sign that we are facing something extraordinary. At the same time, we cannot ignore a spiritual fact. There is something in these blocks that touches a deep part of the human imagination. Some say that when they touch them, they feel vibration. Others talk about an inexplicable calm, as if the rock emanated a silence full of meaning. There are those who describe a familiar sensation, as if it had been there in another life, or at another time. This could just be psychological suggestion, of course, but it can also be a type of ancestral memory, stored in us and in stone. The Andean people believed that every mountain has a spirit, the Apu, and that every important stone holds an energetic essence. When we look at Sacsayhuamán from this perspective, we realize that we are not facing isolated blocks. We are facing a vibrational organism. Each block talks to the block next to it. Each wall speaks to the entire plateau. There is dialogue, there is resonance, there is energetic architecture. But if the Incas inherited this wisdom, who initiated it? Because Sacsayhuamán appears older than official narratives suggest, older than colonial accounts indicate, even older than the history we know. It is as if we are facing a legacy left by a culture whose name has been lost, but whose technique remains etched in stone. And here comes the inevitable hook. If these gigantic blocks were shaped and fitted together with such precision, perhaps we should ask not just how they were made, but what they reveal about the kind of knowledge that humanity once had, and that somehow we forget. Then the question arises that leads to the next block. What if this precision hid signs of a technology that we still don't understand? When we take a closer look at Sacsayhuamán, we realize that the mystery is not just in the size of the blocks, but in the almost surgical precision with which they were fitted together. There are internal angles so perfect that they seem to have been created by invisible molds. There are surfaces that follow such smooth lines that they resemble fluid sculptures more than rough cuts. And perhaps most intriguingly, all of this was done without mortar, without gaps, without imperfections that would compromise the structure over centuries of seismic shocks. It is as if someone had understood the stone not just as matter, but as a mechanism. Science tries to explain. Some engineers claim that it would be possible, although highly unlikely, to reproduce such fits using manual abrasion and progressive adjustment. But the problem isn't just the difficulty of the process. It's the consistency. Each block is unique. Each block has multiple internal angles. Each block was fitted without repeating the same inclinations, which would make any traditional method extremely inefficient. It would be necessary to test, make mistakes, wear out, reposition, correct. But what we see there contains no errors, does not contain adjustment marks, does not contain intermediate phases. It seems finished from the first contact. This is what creates the feeling of impossibility, the absence of visible steps. Modern architects claim that, to carry out a work with such precision, an advanced measurement system would be necessary. Lasers, molds, three-dimensional contouring machinery. However, none of this officially existed at that time. And yet, the stones obey each other as if they had been guided by an architectural program, a design intelligence that anticipates each curve and each fit, with an almost organic synchrony. As if the builder wasn't calculating, he was remembering. At the same time, there is another silent clue: the strength of the structure. Sacsayhuamán has faced earthquakes for centuries, and while much of the more recent construction has repeatedly collapsed, the original walls remain intact. They don't move. They don't get out of alignment. They don't open. This doesn't happen by magic. It happens by advanced engineering. The irregular shape of each block creates a system of natural locks. It is as if the builders understood that the earth is not static. It breathes, pulsates, trembles. And so they designed an architecture that dances with the movement of the ground rather than resisting it. This structural wisdom is so sophisticated that it has only been fully understood by modern engineers in the last 100 years. But what is impressive is not just the technical result. It is the feeling that there is a degree of consciousness embedded in the construction, a consciousness capable of perceiving the vibration of the earth, able to anticipate the future, able to create something that would survive, not decades but eons. And this perception raises a disturbing question. What kind of knowledge is this? Who could have understood with such precision the relationship between geometry, vibration, and stability? Maybe that's why so many alternative theories gain strength. Some talk about sound instruments capable of changing the density of the stone. Others talk about resonance. Others mention technologies based on vibrational manipulation. And although none of these ideas are officially accepted, they all try to fill a real void, the lack of conventional explanation. The mystery remains because the tools have not been found, the marks do not exist, and the method is not compatible with known techniques. But beyond engineering, there is a deeper dimension, the spiritual. When we walk among these stones, we feel that something was made there to be perceived not only with the eyes, but with the body, as if precision were not a technical demonstration, but a language, a message, a vibration recorded in rock, with the aim of crossing centuries and touching those who still have the sensitivity to hear it. And that is why, when we analyze Sacsayhuamán, the question is no longer just, how did they do it, and transforms into something bigger. What does this precision reveal about the worldview of those who created it? And so the next step of the journey arises. The question of the soft stone, one of the most disturbing and fascinating enigmas in the entire Andean highlands. Among all the enigmas of Sacsayhuamán, perhaps none arouses as much perplexity as the ancient Andean story that the stone was soft. This phrase, repeated by elders who keep memories passed down orally for centuries, has always seemed metaphorical, almost poetic. But when we look closely at the delicate curves, the three-dimensional fits and the smoothness of the surfaces, we begin to question whether this metaphor doesn't hide a literal truth. How to mold diorite and andesite, two of the hardest rocks on the planet, as if they were fresh clay. How to create fluid contours without fractures, without chips, without percussion marks. Traditional answers fragment when faced with these questions. According to several legends that have passed through time, there was a knowledge called kapak sonko, the powerful heart, which allowed the ancients to work stone in a way that we do not understand today. Some speak of mysterious plants, a juice capable of temporarily softening the mineral. Others of sound frequencies emitted by ceremonial instruments capable of altering the density of matter. There are even older reports about priests who knew how to talk to the rock, synchronizing its vibration with the vibration of the earth. All of this seems too mystical to be taken seriously until we observe the work with our own eyes. The internal curves of Sacsayhuamán do not behave like cuts. They behave like bending. At some points, it is possible to see that one surface follows the other as if both had been adjusted while they were still alive. Moldable. This type of finish would require such an absolute level of control over the material that, even with modern tools, it would still be extremely difficult to achieve without leaving mechanical traces. But there, on these stones, there are no linear scratches. There are no irregularities. It is as if the rock had surrendered to the hands that touched it. And interestingly, reports of soft rock are not exclusive to the Andes. Cultures as far apart as Egypt, Bolivia, India, and Polynesia have similar histories. It is as if, at some point in antiquity, a type of mineral knowledge, a technology based not on force, but on tune, had been shared between civilizations that we today believe to be disconnected. This cultural coincidence invites us to look beyond the boundaries of conventional archaeology and consider the possibility that there was, in fact, a lost science. A science that worked with the vibrational behavior of matter. Modern science knows that vibration influences structure. Sound waves can break glass. Specific frequencies can modify fluids. Resonant vibrations can move particles. But imagining this applied to tons of rock still seems like fiction. However, when fiction seems to explain the phenomenon better than the official hypothesis, perhaps it is the official hypothesis that needs to be revised. Sacsayhuamán forces us to confront this possibility, and each perfectly curved surface, each fitting that seems to embrace the neighboring block, reinforces this sensation. But beyond the technique, there is a deeply human side to this mystery, because when contemplating these stones, we realize that the intelligence that shaped them was not cold, rigid, mechanical. It was sensitive. It was intuitive. It was an intelligence that understood the earth as a living being, and that saw the stone not as an obstacle, but as an ally. Perhaps that's why so many visitors report feeling a special calm when touching those walls, as if the rock had been shaped not just with skill, but with compassionate intent, an intention to teach, to protect, to preserve. And all of this brings us back to the question that echoes in the hearts of those who observe this impossible work. If there really was a technique capable of softening the stone, where is it now? Why did it disappear? Who decided to keep this knowledge? Or did he not disappear? He just fell asleep, waiting for us to look at the world again with the same spirit as those who built it? This mystery naturally leads us to the next point of the journey. If Sacsayhuamán holds traces of such ancient knowledge, what does it reveal about civilizations that perhaps preceded the Incas themselves? When we look at Sacsayhuamán with an open heart, we realize that he doesn't just talk about the Incas. He talks about something earlier, something older than what we can record, something that vibrates beneath the surface, like a whisper trapped in time. Archaeology itself admits that many of the megalithic bases of Andean constructions do not belong to the Inca period, but to previous cultures, so old that they did not even leave names. It's as if we're walking through layers of memory, each one revealing fragments of a world we don't fully understand. And the more we look, the more we realize that Sacsayhuamán is not just a fortress. It is a palimpsest of forgotten civilizations. The oral tradition of the Caros people and the oldest descendants of the Andes suggests that their ancestors were not the first to occupy those lands. They talk about the Huari Runa, the ancient men, beings who mastered unknown techniques, capable of moving giant rocks and lifting them as if they were light. They talk about architects who spoke to the mountains and who understood the vibration of the earth. For many experts, these stories are nothing more than myths. But when we place these narratives side by side with the physical evidence, something begins to change. Myths begin to look like memories. The legends begin to look like stories. And this suspicion grows when we compare Sacsayhuamán to other megalithic sites around the world. In Göbekli Tepe, in Turkey, we found giant pillars dating back to 12,000 years ago, built by a people who apparently had no agriculture or writing. In Baalbek, Lebanon, we see blocks weighing more than 1,000 tons. In Pumapunku, Bolivia, we see geometric cuts so precise they look modern. How can we explain so much similarity in such distant places? Would disconnected civilizations have developed identical techniques for working hard stone with supernatural precision? Or was there a matrix culture, a mother civilization that disseminated knowledge before disappearing? This idea, although considered controversial, has a profound emotional impact because it touches something within us that recognizes patterns. When we see polygonal walls in Peru that resemble those of ancient Greek cities or perfectly fitted blocks in Japan that resemble Cusco, we feel that there is a genealogy hidden in the stone, an inheritance, an invisible thread that connects seemingly separate cultures. And perhaps this thread is not purely technical. Maybe it's spiritual, a worldview shared by people who perceived the universe as a living organism. For these ancient civilizations, time was not linear. It was cyclical. Everything returned. Everything was transformed. Everything remembered. And this perception perhaps explains why so many of them built works destined to last thousands of years. They were not monuments to kings. They were messages to the future, messages for us. And this perspective opens up a fascinating possibility. What if Sacsayhuamán is not just an architectural remnant? What if it's a message left by a world before ours? A world that suffered a collapse, a transition, a change so profound that it erased cultural memory but not mineral memory? What impresses us is that despite the grandeur of it all, there is a spiritual humility in these constructions. They don't try to impress with ornaments. They impress with silence, permanently, with monumental simplicity. This reveals a consciousness very different from ours. A consciousness that understood that the stone is more patient than the word, that the rock holds secrets that cross the ages, that memory does not depend only on written records, but on forms that survive oblivion. And so, a question begins to emerge with force. If Sacsayhuamán carries echoes of previous civilizations, then what exactly were these civilizations trying to convey to us? What did they know about energy, vibration, astronomy, geometry, and consciousness that today we try to recover little by little? This enigma leads us to the next step of the journey, the relationship between Sacsayhuamán, its perfect forms, and theories of energy and sacred geometry, concepts that many believe are the key to understanding the true purpose of these structures. When we begin to observe Sacsayhuamán not just as a physical work, but as an energetic structure, something within us changes. Suddenly, we stop seeing blocks fitting together and start seeing patterns, invisible lines, flows, as if the place had been designed not just to exist, but to vibrate. This is where reason meets intuition, and where science approaches, even without wanting to admit it. Spiritual traditions that have understood the world through different eyes for millennia. The arrangement of Sacsayhuamán's walls, that monumental zigzag that snakes across the top of the mountain, is not random. It resembles waves, frequencies, oscillations, as if the architecture itself had been designed to capture, amplify, or direct energy. The Earth's natural vibration, the so-called geological pulse, is strongest at high altitudes, and many alternative researchers believe that the ancient builders knew this, who understood how energy moves between mountains, valleys, and rocks, and that Sacsayhuamán was built exactly where telluric lines intersect, points that, for ancient cultures, were portals of communication between worlds. This concept is not exclusive to the Andes. At Stonehenge in England, we find the same concern with alignments. In Egypt, the pyramids follow astronomical and geometric patterns that reflect constellations. In Teotihuacan, Mexico, the city's layout reflects sacred proportions. It's as if distant civilizations shared a silent knowledge. Geometry doesn't describe the world, it awakens it. She organizes it. She tunes it. And maybe that's what we feel when we're in front of these structures. It's not just beauty, it's resonance. Many experts in sacred geometry claim that the polygonal walls of Sacsayhuamán function as large resonators. Irregular fittings, far from being imperfections, improve energy distribution, creating a stable and fluid vibrational field. Some researchers point out that the shapes seem to imitate fractal patterns as if they were replicating in the macro level what happens in the micro. The stone becomes a mirror, the wall becomes a diagram, and we, as we walk among those forms, become part of a circuit. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect is the so-called Sacsayhuamán Gate, a structure that many tourists pass by without noticing. It is not a literal door, but a lithic formation that resembles a three-dimensional portal. It doesn't lead to any room, does not connect to any temple, and yet there is a strange feeling there as if the air vibrates differently. For some, it's just a coincidence. For others, it is the echo of forgotten knowledge, that certain proportions, when applied to stone, create resonance fields capable of altering human perception. Reports from travelers talk about sensations of sudden lightness, temporal lapses, or even vivid dreams after touching certain surfaces. Science explains this as a psychological suggestion, but the number of similar reports is too great to dismiss. And here comes a delicate reflection. Perhaps these builders were not seeking to create energy machines, but spaces of consciousness, places designed to expand perception, open inner portals, and awaken memories that sleep in our depths. Because when we understand that the human being is not just physical, but vibrational, it makes sense to imagine that architecture can also be spiritual. This also aligns with how Andean people see the world. For them, everything has a soul. The mountain has a soul, the water has a soul, the stone has a soul. And building with stone isn't just about building walls. It's about dialoguing with ancestral entities. It's co-creating with the earth. It is transforming matter into prayer. Sacsayhuamán, in this sense, may have been more than a fortress. It may have been an energy center, a place of initiation, a space where earth and sky met, not symbolically but literally. And here a question arises that takes us to the next point of the journey. If Sacsayhuamán was built as a vibrational space, what does this mean for us? What does this energy hold about our own history and about our own interiority? When we stay in front of Sacsayhuamán long enough, something curious happens. The mystery stops being just archaeological and starts to be personal. Questions about technique, origin, and antiquity remain important, of course, but a new layer appears, one that speaks directly to us. Because in a way, these stones don't just keep the memory of past civilizations, they keep a mirror, a silent reflection of what humanity was once able to feel, understand, and create when it walked in tune with the earth. And it is at this point that Sacsayhuamán's invisible legacy begins to reveal itself. The most common feeling among visitors is that of belonging, a kind of inexplicable familiarity, as if that place was recognized by a part of us that cannot express itself in words. Some describe this as déjà vu, others as a memory that does not belong to this life. For many, it's just emotion. But emotion is also memory. Emotion is language. Emotion is the soul trying to speak. And perhaps this is what Sacsayhuamán awakens. Not an intellectual knowledge, but an internal recognition, something that resonates with what we once were and with what we still are, even if forgotten. This feeling intensifies when we realize that those walls were not created to impress with grandeur, but to convey presence. They do not tell stories in sculptures, they do not display gods, kings, or victories. They just are there, immense, perfect, silent. And it is this silence that speaks loudest. Because in a noisy world like ours, where every second is filled with stimuli, the presence of something so profoundly serene causes an almost spiritual estrangement. It's as if, for a moment, we remember what it's like to be aligned with what's essential. At this point, Sacsayhuamán's invisible legacy becomes confused with our own inner legacy. The work invites us to look inside, realizing that perhaps the knowledge that shaped those stones has not disappeared. It has simply changed shape. It has transformed into intuition, into sensitivity, into questions that arise effortlessly. Perhaps deep down, the ancient human who created Sacsayhuamán is not so far from us. Maybe it's sleeping in our consciousness, just waiting for the right silence to awaken. And this silence, paradoxically, also brings a call that is not explicit but felt, a calling that says, stay until the end. The answer may be here. This is the second emotional CTA, and it doesn't stop. This applies only to the video's narrative, but to the viewer's own journey. Because when we confront such profound mysteries, something within us moves. Doubt stops being a threat and becomes a portal. Curiosity stops being a distraction and becomes a compass. It is as if we are being guided, not to understand the past but to remember our own depth. And this memory is the true invisible legacy, not the technique, not engineering, not the chronology, but conscience. A consciousness that recognizes that there is more between heaven and earth than meets the eye. A consciousness that understands that matter stores memory, that energy holds intention, that the stone holds meaning, and that we hold an internal call to reconnect, rebuild, and remember. That's why when we left Sacsayhuamán, we didn't leave the same. We take with us a small change, a flicker of doubt, a breath of possibility, a question that won't leave us. And this question, soft but insistent, leads us to the next step. If Sacsayhuamán holds an invisible legacy, then what does it tell us about our own spiritual journey and about what is still hidden in the silence of the earth? There is a moment, on any walk through Sacsayhuamán, when the mystery stops being in the stones and begins to be in the silence between them. It is as if the entire fortress breathes, not with air but with meaning. And when we realize this, something inside us opens. Understanding stops being intellectual and becomes sensorial, almost spiritual. We no longer seek exact answers. We seek harmony. And paradoxically, it is in this change that the truth begins to come closer. The truth here is not a technical data. It is not a date. It is not a forgotten method. The truth is a perception that these stones were not erected just to resist time but to speak to time. They were put there to be witnesses, earth witnesses, witnesses of humanity, witnesses of ourselves. And this subtle purpose explains something that often goes unnoticed. These walls don't tell us anything explicitly, but they make us feel everything deeply. As we walk among them, we notice that each block seems to occupy exactly the space for which it was created. There's nothing left. Nothing is missing. It is as if each stone had found its natural place, as if the construction was more discovered than manufactured. This sensation leads us to a profound idea. Perhaps whoever built Sacsayhuamán was not just organizing matter, but organizing meaning. Perhaps the fortress is, above all, a lesson in harmony, about alignment, about the art of everything being exactly where it should be. And when we think about this, we begin to notice an emotional mirror. Because how many times in life do we feel like something is out of place? How many times have we tried to fit in parts of ourselves that don't seem to belong? Sacsayhuamán, without saying a word, reminds us that everything finds its space when it is shaped with intention and placed with awareness. It's a mineral metaphor for what we feel, but don't always know how to express. And it is at this point that the narrative changes direction. Because, contrary to what many think, Sacsayhuamán does not want to show us the past. He wants to show us the present. He wants us to realize that the same intelligence that shaped the stone is the intelligence that shapes our journey. The same vibration that supported the wall is the vibration that supports our soul. And the same precision that fits the blocks together is the precision that fits each encounter, each doubt, each awakening. And so we reach the threshold of conclusion. If these stones hold a moving silence, what is this silence trying to tell us about the end of one era and the beginning of another? At the top of Sacsayhuamán, where the wind seems to carry memories and the horizon opens like an ancient manuscript, the journey finds its final silence. Not that empty silence, but the fertile silence, where something awakens within us. We realize that the stones didn't come here just to support the story. They came to support the soul. They remind us that every outer search is, at heart, an inner search, and that the mystery of the world is always a reflection of the mystery that we keep within ourselves. When we leave these walls, we take no answers. We got a call, a soft but insistent call like a whisper. Keep walking, keep asking, keep waking up. Because the spiritual journey does not end with a conclusion, it expands with a realization. And if something in this video touched your core, if some silent stone seemed to speak to you, then maybe it's time to move on with us. Your soul may be remembering the path. And in the end, there is only one question left. Simple, profound, eternal. What if what we call the end is just the beginning of a memory that the earth still keeps in silence?